Utilizing traditional Japanese Moxibustion will widen the symptomology that you can treat and get you greater efficacy with every treatment without using acupuncture. Interested in hearing more? Well, then stay tuned. By the way, make sure to watch to the end to learn about my favorite places to buy the highest grade Moxibustion I have ever found. Now, if you're new to this channel, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications all about traditional Japanese medicine. Why am I so confident that Moxibustion will change your practice? It's simple. I've witnessed the impact firsthand, not only with my students, but also in my personal practice. Interestingly enough, a lot of my students have chosen to be exclusively Moxibustionists and get rid of acupuncture entirely in their practice. Now, as I just said, I'm not just a teacher of Moxibustion, I'm also a practitioner, and I use Moxibustion on every single client that I see every single day of my practice. I've seen Moxibustion change things that only Moxibustion can change. It's a phenomenal substance, and I'm so excited to help you add this on or to even develop this more within your own personal practice. So let's get straight into it. First of all, a little bit of history. Moxibustion in Japan is definitely different than in TCM. A few examples of this is normally in TCM, you have probably about 2 different types of Moxibustion, maybe 3. So you have stick Moxa, needle top Moxa, and then what people just refer to as the large cones, usually put on things like garlic, ginger, aconite, salt. Now in Japanese Moxibustion, these large cones are called Chinetsu Kyu. They have an actual name. They are kind of amazing. I have a video, I'll link it up here, on how to do Chinetsu Kyu that I made a really, really long time ago. Now, outside of Chinetsu Kyu and needle top Moxa, or what we call Kyutoshin, there's also other types of Moxibustion. In particular, there's half grain, or what often people call direct Moxa. Now, Moxibustion, a bit of a history, is actually older than acupuncture itself. Moxibustion was the original acupuncture. The very first books on acupuncture were actually on Moxibustion. This goes back probably as far as a really cool mummy called Utsi, which I highly suggest checking out Utsi. He's really, really interesting. And he has tattoos and also scars from where he more than likely burned Moxa all over his body, because at that time making needles was a little bit difficult. Now, while acupuncture and Moxibustion and herbology originally came over from China, it was medically controlled and governed by the Japanese government since 701. And now if you're interested in more of the history of Japan and its acupuncture, check out Ishitsure. It's a really interesting law that was created to really govern all the medicine in Japan. Saying that though, during the Edo period, the Japanese closed their doors to any foreign trade. So the only foreign trade that was going to be done was through either the Chinese or the Dutch, through only 2 ports in the entire country. And those were very, very strictly controlled. So during the Edo period, Japan's medicine really did flourish, and Japan went back to a more classical version of Chinese medicine and then developed upon that. Things that were developed during this time period were the dashin hammer, uses of different metals, definitely shonishin. Also, the Sugiyama Waiichi guide tube was developed during the Edo period. Moxibustion as well was something that flourished during the Edo period. Now, during this period, the Ishitsure, the law is still in effect. So acupuncture has to be practiced only within a medical license. You have to study and be licensed to do it through that law and regulation. Moxibustion itself, though, was something that the common people could develop and utilize for their everyday health. And it was really, really important to their health. People would use it to travel all around Japan, and there's several ukiyo paintings depicting both monks and lay people doing Moxibustion on each other. Now, this went so far as the actual government actually encouraging lay people to do Moxibustion for their health. One of the most famous Japanese poets, Basho, actually wrote in one of his diaries that the most essential thing for anybody to have is their Moxibustion and incense. So any diseases that were flourishing during this period, Moxibustion was the way that people were able to treat it. And the way that they treated it was with half grain direct Moxa. So let's get into why half grain direct Moxa is different from needle top Moxa, Chinetsu Kyu, pole Moxa, or even Takegyu, also known as ontake now, more recently, thanks to Oren Kivity. So we're going to talk about differences in these types of Moxa. Now, half grain Moxa in particular is extremely good at treating a specific thing at a specific place. So that means whether it's tonifying or dispersing, it's really, really good at treating it, but it's not going to affect a really wide area. Oftentimes when you disperse with half-grain moxa, and yes, you can disperse with half-grain moxa, a lot of my patients tell me it feels a bit like a needle prick. So it actually feels sharp, hot, and pointy. Now, saying that with half-grain moxa, we are never leaving a blister on purpose. Traditionally, you probably would have, but anymore we don't. And tonifying moxa too is going to be for a specific place. Let's say on the abdomen, there's one place that needs to be tonified, but the surrounding area does not. This makes sense too with maybe like a contusion. The very center of the contusion might want to be tonified with the surrounding area and bruise-like structures and stuff like that to be dispersed or even bloodlet. Now, this is really, really different than Chinetsu Kyu. So what often TCM practitioners call those really large cones. So Chinetsu Kyu is really good specifically at dispersing. Now, saying if you make your Chinetsu Kyu too large or too small, it's going to change how it actually reacts to the patient. A really large cone is going to disperse a large area really well. So this is great to be used on gallbladder 21, on that contusion I was just talking about, on the surrounding edges, on places that have a lot of heat and inflammation, like knee or joint pain in acute injury situations. It's really, really great. Now, how you utilize this moxa is different though than half-grain moxa, because you want to wait until it feels not warm but hot for the patient and then take it off. Now, learning how to do Chinetsu Kyu without burning a patient does take a little bit of skill and technique. I recommend checking out this video up here that I referenced before. Let's talk a little bit about the difference between Chinetsu Kyu and needle top moxa. Now, needle top moxa is a beautiful form of moxa. I often think it's one of the easier ones for TCM only practitioners to use. It's really not that hard to do, really, and depending on how you do it, it can be really, really effective. However, needle top moxa is a tonifying only technique, whereas half-grain direct moxa or Tonetsu Kyu and Chinetsu Kyu were both dispersive and tonifying. So they have a little bit more variability to their usage. Needle top moxa, you only want to use to tonify. Now that brings us to the other two types of moxa I referenced, one being pole moxa and takegyu, or also known as ontake. Now, pole moxa, I honestly don't really use a lot in clinic. I don't really find that it's super effective, and it takes a ton of time, and it's really smoky. I actually think this is the one kind of moxa outside of a few very specific situations, like very, very specific situations. I honestly think pole moxa is not really important to use, and it's actually really difficult to use, I think, for a lot of practitioners because it gives off so much smoke. I also highly recommend not giving pole moxa to your clients to do at home, because oftentimes they just don't do it because it's so smoky. Now, ontake or takegyu is a very, very useful little tool. I love this thing. I use it often when I treat horses, not with acupuncture, I'm not allowed to here, but when I do treat horses, it's a great little tool. It is great for tonification, and it can do a little bit of dispersion depending on how you use it. I do know that Oren Kivity has percussion and modalities and stuff like that he's utilized with this tool. I don't do those specifically. I still find that it's really, really beneficial, and it's just really pleasant to use. Like, it feels really, really nice. So this guy too, definitely a little bit more tonifying, I would say, unless you have a very specific way to use it. I think that explanation is really good at explaining how moxa is supposed to move deep toxins within the body. Classically, that's how it's talked about, and it does that because it's influencing the cellular level rather than just the nerve level, which is how acupuncture needles work. Now, this is extremely beneficial for your clients and can add an even wider base to your clientele, meaning you can treat wider symptomology with more effectiveness because you're actually able to tonify a lot quicker than most people are able to do with their needles. Traditionally, it's so much easier to tonify with moxa and disperse with your needles because Moxibustion is so good at tonifying. That doesn't mean it's not good at dispersing. It can also do that. Saying that, there have been many, many times when I have not been able to treat something with needles simply because of the nature of it that I am able to treat with my Moxibustion. One example of this is shingles. Shingles is so hard to treat with needles because you can't treat the actual outbreak with the needle. It hurts a lot. I mean, you could, but it's going to hurt your client. However, if you use Moxibustion, you could actually treat the shingle and take away the heat and the pain immediately, and then use your needles to take away the nervy sensation, or even your Moxibustion. Sometimes it's actually quicker. Also, things like heel pain, like neuropathy in the feet. All of these things are treated so easily with Moxibustion, in particular direct Moxibustion. And usually neuropathy, you can make 25 to 50% improvement in neuropathy in one session with direct Moxa, where it might take you 10 to 15 with needles. It's extremely, extremely effective. Just to give you an example of this, I have a client who has neuropathy post-cancer treatment. It's not important the type of the cancer or the type of the chemo. Honestly, a lot of them are creating neuropathy in the feet regardless. But I was able to help him in just 2 to 3 treatments to regain feeling back in his feet. And it was all with doing direct Moxa on the points that he could not feel. And you do direct half-grain Moxa until the patient feels that it's hot. And then you do one more cone. Of course, there's other things that we're doing in the body to also address the reasons for that neuropathy, but locally, a super effective treatment. Another example is a patient who came in at the very beginning of my career. He was actually an American when I was still practicing in Japan. He was in his 70s or 80s, and he had horrible, horrible neuropathy in his, I believe it was his right second, third, and fourth toe. And the reason why he had this neuropathy is because he used to be an electrical wire worker, and he had an electrical wire, like one of the big wires that we have here in the States, fall on his foot and electrocute his foot. And he hadn't had feeling in his feet in 40 plus years. With Moxibustion, hot Moxa, half grain direct Moxa on his toes, I was able to get back his feeling in his feet in one session, and it never went away again. And if you don't think that's cool, I'm not sure if we can be friends, because that is really, really, really cool. That is just one example of how Moxibustion can completely change someone's life. On the other side of things, we also have examples of like doing Moxibustion on C-section scars. And I've had a client who was literally in early menopause. Her C-section scar was this thick above her belly and that long. No joke, it's the worst scar I've ever seen. I did Moxibustion on her scar and other treatment too, but on her scar specifically, it helped her. Within 3 months, her period came back and her scar was not even visible. Like you could barely tell it was there. It was insane. Not raised at all. Skin color was great. It was awesome. And she was 23, so that's a huge change for the quality of her life. But hopefully you're really excited to start using Moxa, or to increase the amount of Moxa or the efficacy or the technique of Moxa that you do in your clinic. So let's talk about how to integrate it more into your practice and what you have to do. First of all, I recommend that you practice half grain Moxa, in particular 5 minutes to 10 minutes every single day without failure. Now I have a few videos that I can link up here, and I'll also put them in the description box below to help start that half grain Moxa practice. The next thing that I highly recommend you do is you find a teacher, whether it's myself or someone else, who can teach you half grain Moxa and really walk you through not only the technique of it, but also the application of it. The second part, the application of your Moxa, is really important. Otherwise, you're going to end up learning a technique and never using it. I don't want you to waste your time. Make sure you learn how to use and apply your techniques. Now, just to make sure everyone's safe, I always tell all of my students, and now that you're watching this, you are one of my students, so I always tell my students to practice their technique in a very specific order, and that is you're going to start on an inanimate object, and then you treat yourself, and then treat friends and family, and then you'll treat the public. So that was a ton of information about Moxibustion. I know for 100% that if you're able to either increase the amount of Moxa you use in your practice or able to develop a Moxa practice, you are going to be 100% more successful in your practice, because you're going to be able to see a wider clientele and have higher efficacy treating those patients. Now, my biggest goal for you and all of my students is to have confidence in your technique and competence in the way you apply it. If you are looking for a way to get that confidence and competence, please do set up an interview with ShinKyu University and see if mentorship is the right way to build your practice. You can find a link for that in the description box below. So thank you so much for watching all the way to the end. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell to be notified of future videos all about traditional Japanese medicine. Now, I know I promised you a treat of telling you where I get my Moxibustion. I always get my Moxibustion from 2 different companies. One of them being Kobayashi Ryoho and the other being Kobayashi Ryoho. However, Kobayashi Ryoho does have a distributor here in the US called Moongate Moxa. I highly recommend buying Miyabi for your half-grain Moxa practice. That is personally what I use as well. Now, if you're interested in watching more about Moxibustion, I highly recommend watching this video right over here about Chinetsu Kyu.